meeting is being recorded.
I'm sure we've all got it now.
Yeah. Right. So I'm going to share my screen because we've got some slides for you. So I'll start sharing. Bear with me if there's any technical hitches. Sorry, I've not done this in quite a while, so it might creak at the edges as I try and remember how to do the technical bits. But hopefully we'll be all good. Sorry, see, technical hitch already. I was on the wrong slide. Oh dear. Oh, hang on. What's going on? Sorry. Hang on. See, this was always going to happen, wasn't it? It was. There we go. It's working this time. Sorry. Okay. So, yep, Elmer is our very first art trail, and we are very excited about bringing him to the Files Post. He's already been out and about around Blackpool, and as you can see, there's been lots of really successful art trails around the country. So he's in Manchester, Elephants in Sheffield, Rockets in Leicester, and now it's our turn. If you haven't already painted a sculpture for an art trail, I'm sure you'll have seen one, and they do attract thousands of visitors every year. And we're certain that Elmer's going to do the same for Blackpool next spring. So he has already been out and about. He's visited Blackpool Tower and some of our other main landmarks. And he has attracted quite a lot of attention when he's been on his little adventures. But why are we having an art trail? We obviously are for Files House, which is a hospice on the Files Coast. It provides specialist care to children with life-limiting complex medical conditions and also supports their families. We have things like sibling groups and all sorts of support available to look after a whole family. And it costs more than £1.3 million a year to run our services. We don't get a huge amount of support from the government, so raising awareness and funds is really essential to what we do. So we'd like to share a short video with you that really shows how important our services are to the families and the children that we care for, and hopefully you'll enjoy it.
When Emily was born, she required a lot of medical intervention. They resuscitated her several times in the room. She was fully ventilated. There was very little brain activity. All you could see was wires and tubes, and you could hardly see her.
I didn't want to connect with the baby I was carrying anymore. After his birth, I actually said to my mum, "That's not my baby, that's their baby." And it took a long time to connect with Roman because I was so convinced that if I loved him, he would be gone. Roman has something called DeGeorge syndrome. His condition is actually inoperable, which unfortunately for Roman means that he's life limited. We first found out that Roman wasn't going to be a stereotypically normal child at our 20-week scan, and that's when we discovered that he was missing a vital part of his circulatory system. The DeGeorge syndrome, which is what caused the defects, was all very much an unknown, so the rest of the pregnancy was quite anxiety-filled.
Emily was born term plus 12, and there was some complications during labour, and she was actually starved of oxygen. A few days later she had an MRI scan which showed that she had quite substantial brain damage. And it was kind of at that point that I thought, oh my God, I'm not going to take home just a baby, I'm going to take home medical equipment. This part of me that still hates that it was just taken like that. Sorry.
Now Roman is 3.5 and he's quite mobile. He can't walk unaided, but he's a very determined little boy. Illness, infection, virus can affect Roman in such a drastic way. Other children in the family had the virus that was going around. Roman had this virus. I knew something wasn't right. And what I actually did was I rang for the ambulance, and it was hours later that Roman's actual doctor came onto the ward and she says, do you realise what was happening? I says, no. It's as if you'd have left it. She says, he wouldn't be here. And she says, he's such a lucky little boy.
Here at Bryan House, we're more of a home from home. We are the only children's hospice over the Fylde coast. We provide support for children and their families.
We trust the staff at Bryan House implicitly. It's a very safe environment for Roman to be Roman and other children like Roman. They have a relationship with Roman, and having that is irreplaceable.
We've got to live a life, and Bryan House has helped us live that life. I remember she was about 18 months old, and I remember thinking, I'm not really a mum, I'm a nurse. Having Bryan House involved has made me be able to be mum and not just nurse.
It costs more than £1.3 million a year to keep the doors open at Bryan House, which means we must continuously call on our community for help and support.
Unfortunately, Bryan House doesn't receive that much government funding, and we rely on donations, people donating their time and their money.
It's not this hospital kind of place that you imagine a children's hospice would be. It's a very vibrant and fun-filled place.
Bryan House is a huge part of our life. Without it, I really don't know where I would be, and I don't know where Emily would be.
Sorry, just going to get back to the presentation. There we go.
So quite hard to watch at bits, but we really think it's important that when you are coming on board as artists with us, that you know what we do and how important it is really here on the Fylde coast.
And we're thrilled that we've got Elmer as our sculpture, because we think he really represents well the children that we care for, because he's unique and he represents kindness, difference, acceptance. So he represents our children so well, and he'll be such a good ambassador for our organisation. So we're really excited to have 30 Elmers parading around the Fylde coast next year. And we're hoping that it'll help us to raise lots of money and awareness of our charity, both within the local community and beyond it. So I suppose that's why we're so excited about having our Elmer Art Trial next year, but we wanted to share some of the major benefits for people who submit designs and are selected as artists for our art trail. So all featured artists will receive an honorarium payment for their completed design. You'll be featured on our app and website. Your name will be on your sculpture plaque, and then there's just loads of opportunities to network with other artists and organisations and individuals in the Blackpool area and within the community. And so the timeline for our art trail is, at the moment, we're out to our call for artists. So artists are able to submit designs at the moment through our paper form or online. Then the submission window will end at the end of September. In November, we'll have our artist selection event where we'll allow our sponsors to choose their favourite designs. In December to February will be our painting period, and then our trail will be out and about in spring next year. So that's a little bit about Bryan House and about our art trail, and now I'm going to hand you over to Annie for a little bit more about art trails and Wild in Art.
Hi guys, I think there's a lot of familiar faces for me on the call. So hello to those of you who I already know, or those of you who painted sculptures for our Wild in Art trails in the past. But also welcome to anyone who is new to sculpture trails. I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an overview, not only about the way that we work and the way that we try and support artists, but also give you a bit of an understanding about the way that we work in partnership with different organisations across the UK. So Wild in Art, this is our 15th year of delivering sculpture trails across the UK and internationally. This is, I think, Elmer's 4th or 5th kind of incarnation with us. So we've been working with Anderson Press for several years, but we also work on lots of other trails with different publishers. So at the moment we're working with Aardman, we're working with Snowman and Snowdog through Penguin, and we work with lots of different brand owners, but we've delivered over 100 events across 5 different continents. We've got events next year in Denmark for the first time. We're working in Germany this year. We've got projects in Australia and New Zealand, and obviously all over the UK. And our events do everything that we've heard about. So they're about placemaking, they're about bringing colour to cities, they're about creating these fantastic, bright, colourful interventions, bringing art out of the gallery spaces onto the streets, hopefully to inspire and to invigorate those kind of spaces and bring people onto our high streets. We know certainly in a post kind of COVID world, we want to try and to try and bring people together and to do things that are free family activities over the summer or during Christmas or in spring breaks, so that young people can get out and explore. We kind of like to think about it as a bit of health by stealth, getting people cycling, walking, running, skipping from place to place, discovering new parts of the towns and cities that they live in. And at the end of each of the projects, when the auctions take place, hopefully raising money for our event partners. So Wild in Art works in partnership. So how that partnership works is that, and we might have charity partners, we might have bids, we might have local authorities, but the vast majority of our event partners do tend to be charities. So hospices, children's hospitals, zoos, conservation charities, things like that. So we put together mass participation events that inspire people, that allow people to discover new areas, that embed creativity through our learning programs, through our art programs, engage all parts of communities. We like to think it's community cohesion at its kind of strongest, and encourage health and well-being. So the trails have lots of different facets, but I think certainly, I mean, I know I'm the arts and learning manager for Wild in Art, but our artists are absolutely core to everything that we do. And whilst we have these wonderful open calls to try and encourage artists to get involved and to come up with spectacular designs, We always want, we don't have trails without our artists. We don't have trails without our sponsors, so that's equally important. But art is always at the heart of everything that we do. And I know when Charlie and Sally Ann set the business up 15 years ago, having worked for other organisations that maybe didn't support the needs and the best interests of artists as well, it was really important for them to make sure that artists were paid a fair rate for the work that they do, that their ideas were considered and supported, and that they were part of the mechanism, that they got PR, that they got exposure, that they were supported through the process. So we've put together a whole series of documents and support packages for all of our event partners, but each of our event partners deliver the projects directly. So all the core staff that are working on the delivery of projects are normally based within the charity or event partner organisation. Wild in Art work with them to provide a whole suite of documents, processes, procedures, operational manuals. I work with the team in Blackpool to support them to develop their learning programme and their artist programme, talking to them about best practice. So whilst these are branded Wild in Art events, if you are selected as an artist to work on this particular project or with any of our event partners, your contract and your relationship is directly with that event partner. And whilst there is terms of reference, there may be slight variations from this event to other events that you might have submitted your work towards. But it is, as I said, it's all about the art. It's about breaking art out of galleries, and hopefully kind of celebrating all different genres of the visual arts, fine art, illustration, kind of crafts like mosaic. We've had all sorts of texture and text, and we've also, you name it, we have had different artistic forms on our trails. And whilst we encourage submissions from professional artists, we always try and engage as many local artists as possible in any of our events. I think it's really important to any town, city or area of the country. They don't want to feel like artists have been helicoptered in from all over the rest of the country and that there isn't a representation locally. So if you are based in and around Blackpool and you have your own little kind of connections or groups or consortiums of artists, please do make sure that you are sharing the message that this is an opportunity, and ideally the team at Bryan House would like as many local artists to be represented or to submit or to get involved in this project as possible. I think it's fair to say that most of our event partners would ideally like there to be at least 50% of the sculptures that have been created and made in the area from that area, so that they can feel that there's a good representation. But we at Wild in Art know that we have a huge collection of artists all over the UK who have got the bug, who absolutely love creating sculptures for the trail and do regularly submit. So what I thought it might be useful to kind of talk through is just kind of some of the things that you might need to consider, or you might want to consider when making your submission. Popped forward. So yeah, in terms of design considerations, we want things that it might seem obvious to say, but family friendly. These events are designed to be viewed by the general public. There will be grandparents coming with their grandchildren, nieces, nephews, aunties, uncles, but they do kind of inspire and interest people from across our communities, really diverse audiences. So we want things that we don't necessarily want everything to just be kind of family friendly, and we're not saying that you can't include details that are kind of really pertinent. You might want to look at environmental impact, you might want to look at some of the kind of deeper kind of themes or subjects of our times. You might want to look at the history of Blackpool or the area, or kind of highlight other things, but we just ask nothing overtly sexual, political, or really controversial in nature for obvious reasons. And another kind of hurdle that quite a lot of our submissions kind of hit are breaching intellectual property rights. So we do need to be quite careful that we're not infringing directly on anybody's intellectual property rights. So any other kind of characters. So it's very unlikely that Anderson Press would give us permission to use a character from another brand or another kind of published author, designer, film character. It tends to be the case, and it's not always the case. I know the guys at Aardman are a little bit more flexible and are happy to look into things a bit further. But we always say, where possible, try and use your own designs, your own inspiration. It can be brilliant. I mean, some of the most successful designs that we have are maybe linked to, I don't know, a pun or a celebrity kind of. But what I would say is just be very mindful of how that is being represented. If we have a David Bowie sculpture, it tends to pick up something of a characteristic or a flash or something that alludes to it without being a direct copy. So I'm not saying, it might be that you are really inspired by Star Wars or kind of Lord of the Rings, or there's something that has a real resonance to you. What I would say is kind of there's a kind of very fluffy line or blurry line between what's classed as fan art and what's classed as copyright infringement. So what I would always say is use your kind of ideas, your designs, and if you can, avoid kind of infringing on anything. If you're thinking about a pun or thinking about wanting to link to a local celebrity, there's nothing that would stop you from touching base with them or their agent or their people to make sure that there's nothing that is going to be viewed negatively. I know, for example, when we were doing a Snow Dog event several years ago, there was a sculpture that was designed to look like Paddington, and when they found out that it had been done without, this is before I started, we were told by the publishers if it went on the trail or if it went to auction, they would start legal proceedings. So we just have to be a little bit careful, a little bit mindful, and obviously, if you're going to be putting in a number of submissions, and I think that the terms and conditions for this particular event is that you can submit up to 3. It's very unlikely that you would be successfully commissioned for anything more than 2, because obviously we want to be fair and open and make sure that as many artists can be involved as possible. The other things to think about is we get lots and lots of submissions that have 3D elements. So it might be hats, it might be necklaces, it might be things poking out of it, it might be all sorts of things from wings to you name it. It is very unlikely that we will be able to push forward something past the shortlisting stage if it has additional features, because we have a whole lot of additional health and safety issues if something is a non-standard shape and not using the kind of standardized paint techniques that we recommend. If you think about the rigors of a trail, something being out in all weathers, the amount of interaction, some of our trails get upwards of 200,000 visitors to a trail. So anything that isn't part of the original fabrication needs to be tested, needs to be wind rated, needs to have all sorts of kind of risk assessments to make sure that it's not a risk to public health, and that, or, if it's going to be displayed internally, that it's had the right fire ratings. And obviously anything that's outside of the standard causes an awful lot of extra additional work. Now, in some instances, it might be considered that is worth it, but it is unlikely if you are an artist who hasn't worked on a wild and art event or hasn't got particular experience in fabrication or working in fiberglass. It's unlikely that we'd be able to offer you that commission. Now, I never want to kind of cap anybody's imagination. So if there's something that you are really, really keen on submitting, then sometimes it can be worth a punt. If you're putting in more than one design, then maybe don't make all of them with the additions, or potentially you could contact the team. We always encourage artists to think about mosaic. Mosaic sculptures are really, really popular, and if that is your medium, then we'd love to kind of hear your ideas, and potentially we can look at whether there's possible uplifts for additional costs towards materials, because we know the cost of producing mosaic sculptures can be a lot more costly. And if you had a really amazing idea, in some instances, those things we have looked at getting somebody else to do the fabrication of hats and additional things. So again, I don't want to completely crush those ideas, but what I would say is just be quite mindful of the fact that it will reduce the likelihood of those being selected, because we have to think of lots of other elements. And also think about, if you're a regular submitter and you have submitted to more than one Wild in Art event, one of the things that I often get asked is, why are all the Wild in Art events all happen at the same time? Because the painting periods are then all at the same time. And if you've been very successful in 1 year and you've had 5 designs submitted, can you meet the capacity and meet the timeline to make sure that those are submitted? So there are a few things I would say that it's definitely worth considering. Make sure that you have checked the terms and conditions for this particular event. As I said, whilst we have, most of our event partners will use our standard terms and conditions, there may be slight changes or slight differences for each individual event. So make sure that you're aware. And what I always say to any artist who is looking to send in a direct submission or a response to a call to artists is make sure you've had a think about the design that you are thinking about. How long realistically do you think that might take you? Because I promise you, if it's one of your first events, it will always take longer than you think. And I'm sure if there's a few regular artists on the call, you will attest to that. And sometimes it's about scaling those designs back to make them practical, to make it doable within that time. And I think, like in any business, whenever I'm approaching, applying for a new contract or looking at a new piece of work, I always kind of am quite methodical about thinking, how much is my materials going to cost? What costs might I have to consider? If I'm going to be working in the Blackpool kind of communal painting space, is there free parking? Am I going to have to, think about the cost of traveling to and from that space? If I'm not local, how much might it cost to stay or find local accommodation? How much is my petrol going to cost? What other materials and food and teas and coffees might I need to consider? And if it's going to take me 4 days as opposed to 8 days, how does that make my day rate? So if the fixed fee for this project is £1,000, for that commission, but you will need to think about other costs. That's not just for your time, that needs to cover your materials. You will have the varnish provided for you, but you need to be thinking about what paints and how much you might need to use. And again, those additional costs. And if you are not from Blackpool and you're thinking, well, I'll just get it delivered to me, then do think, because that I think is the biggest variable for any of our projects. Some of our event partners are able to negotiate kind of logistics partners, so they're able to find a man with a van who'll be able to do deliveries at a much reduced cost. But if you're up in Aberdeen and your sculpture needs to be transported from one place to another, but there's no other artists in Scotland, then do think, those kind of costs for moving. It's not like putting a box in the post and being able to get it couriered relatively cheaply. So do have a think about what are all of the costs that are going to be involved, and is this something that practically you can do? Because absolutely, we know most of you will be really wanting to kind of support Brian House, but we are really appreciative of the fact that this could be, or is in most instances, your main income stream. So we need to make sure that you've considered all the variables and that this is something that's that is tangible for you to take part in. And we really want to encourage new and emerging artists to get involved, and for this maybe to be one of the first commissions that they've had, because we want to encourage new artists into the fold. We want to make sure as many local artists as possible can be involved. And if we need to find some additional support to mentor and to make sure that you have the people in place to make sure you get the best experience out of this, then we'll absolutely do that. So yeah, do kind of work with us on those things and let us know if there is anything that you need. And we also want to try and encourage, you know, a diverse range of artists to get involved with this. And that might mean that you have other kind of support or access needs. So when you are submitting your application, if you do have any accessibility or learning support needs that the team need to be aware of, please just make sure that you flag those up so that we can make sure that we can give you and offer that support if that is necessary. I know we've had a lot more submissions recently from artists who are either with visual impairment issues or hearing impairment, and we can always try and be as adaptive and supportive as possible, but we kind of need to know that information up front. So if we can flick forward. So we over the last, I've been with Wild and Art since 2015, and working in lots of different with lots of different hats on. So as I said, I work for both the learning, or I manage the learning program and the artist program, and hopefully every year we learn more and more and more about different ways of working that our event partners have worked, that our artists have worked. So we're always constantly evolving the artist information packs that we put together. If you are successful in having a design selected, and just to give you an idea of the kind of process, although you know we've seen that timeline, so you would submit as an artist through the open call process. Once that deadline has passed, there'll be a small team from Bryan House, from Wild in Art, and possibly some other kind of members of the team, or members of leadership and things like that, who will come together, and we will do a first shortlisting. So we will look through those, the widest possible set of designs. So if we had 200 designs, we'd look through those, and those will be kind of graded and kind of selected by and shortlisted. So we'll bring that number down and remove if there's lots of repetition of themes. So recently we did an Owl and the Pussycat trail, an Owl trail, and there was lots of Owl and the Pussycat designs, and we know that we don't want a trail to be made up of 100 designs of the same theme. So that's what we'll do at that first point. And then we will let those artists know if they haven't been shortlisted, so that they're not hanging around waiting. So once we've got that core pot, that may be 100 or between 80 and 100 designs, those will then be put together digitally, put into slides or a portfolio that will then be available for the sponsors to look through, either at a live event or online. And then once those sponsors have selected the design that they want to represent them on the trail, we know that design is going to be commissioned. That's the point that you would then be contracted, and that fee and the kind of agreement would be in place. So we know what the kind of submission process. We appreciate the amount of time and energy that artists take to come up with those designs and those concepts. So we don't want you to be waiting around too long. We want you to be kept informed, but know that there is, for this event, I think that we're looking for about 30 large Elmer sculptures. So if you're putting in and you're submitting, the chances are there will be kind of 30 large sculptures that will be selected either through the sponsor's selection or through the team, who will maybe select a few of the designs on behalf of the charity partner. So that's the kind of general premise. We then, once you're contracted, you'd receive a physical contract to sign, and we'd arrange an artist briefing session where we'll talk in more detail about what materials to use, and more importantly, what not to. You'll be provided with all sorts of information and guidance about that process, how to work with your sponsor, how to document, marketing guidelines. You'll have kind of access to all of the collateral and everything else that you might need. and obviously inductions and health and safety briefings into the painting space if you're working in that space. And then obviously you would be regularly communicated with to let you know how the event is progressing. And I think you would also receive kind of invitations to certain key events during the course of the event. So it might be that you'd receive a ticket to the farewell, or a ticket to the auction, or a ticket to any previews or launches. So you'll be included in all elements of the project. You can just, so there's just an example of a page. So different paints to use, things not to use, but we normally recommend acrylic, emulsion, or spray paints. So just kind of have those in mind. Things like watercolors, gouaches, and oil paints. Any kind of felt tips or permanent markers we don't tend to use, but we can kind of talk in more detail about that when we come, once you are commissioned. And there's also a fantastic little support group I thought I'd mention. So if you've worked on a Wild and Art event before, or maybe you haven't, and this is a new one, it's not something we set up and run ourselves, which is why I love it so much, because it's outside of our ownership. I do kind of regularly contribute or try and respond to answers and some questions if I can. But it's a group that was set up by artists for artists working on sculpture trails, and it's almost like having, I think there's over 200 members of it now. It's like having 200 artists in your pocket whenever you've got any kind of questions or queries, which tends to be a lot more responsive sometimes than we or our event partners can be. If you're working on a sculpture at a weekend and you need an answer straight away, it may be that somebody has a recommended material or advice, or this hasn't worked, or how can I do this? How can I get a straighter line with my masking tape? My primer seems to be coming off, or this doesn't seem to be working. So it's there, you can search it. It's just called the Wild and Art Artist Support Group. It's a private group, so you do have to kind of request access. And there's a few questions to answer, and I'd always, I'd always make reference to the fact that you're taking part or you're submitting in a Wild and Art event, just to make sure that that we authorise that and you can join the group. A lot of people leave that question unanswered, and then it takes more time for us to kind of make sure that they're in the right place. So yeah, that's kind of it from I could talk for hours, as I think most people could attest to. The other thing I just wanted to mention, if you are local to Blackpool, and we will be running a learning programme. So we've got about 30 or 40 schools who are looking to take part and create their own mini version of an Elmer. Now, it isn't a requirement that they work with an artist. They can produce it in whatever way, shape or form they choose. But some schools will often ask if we have any links to artists, if they're looking for an artist in residence or looking for somebody who might want to engage in the programme or support them through creating their smaller Elmer. So if you are local and that's the kind of work that you specialise in, it might be worth dropping the team a quick note or mentioning it in your application, because if anybody does ask the question, then we've got a group of artists who might be able to fulfil or support in doing that. And obviously I mean paid, I don't mean unpaid, but it's useful to know who has those contacts. So in the first instance, then Esther or Joanne are going to be your best points of contact, going through the submission process. And as we mentioned, if there's anything that they can't support you with, then they know that that I'm here to support and try and respond to any questions that you might have.
Fabulous.
Hang on, let me get rid of that. There we go. Brilliant. So yeah, that's kind of the presentations we wanted to share with you. But if anyone has got any questions or wants to ask anything or comment on anything, then please feel free to unmute or pop your questions in the chat. We've got time now that we set aside for questions, so don't be shy, feel free. Oh, you're muted, Annie.
Terrible at doing this. Can I just get, from those of you whose faces I can see, how many of you were local to Blackpool?
Yeah, me.
You are. Hello.
Yeah.
So would this be your first
Yes.
event submission? Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. And MJ Max, I think you had your hand up yet. Anybody else local? No. Oh, Beth. Beth. Mandy?
Yeah, it'd be my first go as well. Yeah. If you were successful, can like other people help you paint it? Because obviously they're quite big.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you want to bring a team of DIY SOS then crew, then absolutely. I mean, there's lots of ways to paint an Elmer, and there's not many things that we haven't seen over the years. But yeah, I think the thing I absolutely love about the communal painting spaces is it is a melting pot. I worked as an artist for years in isolation, and you work in your studio, you never speak to anybody, you don't have the opportunity, unless you go to those really awkward breakfast meeting or networking meetings, to really chat and explore ideas. So even if it's just for a really short period of time, actually being in a space with other people, chatting about their techniques, chatting about what works for them, chatting about everything. I mean, I've seen people who've literally collaborated. I saw somebody get a job in a tattoo studio, working in a, so one of the artists who was working was like, oh yeah, I work at a tattoo studio, and the other person had just come out of uni, and she ended up doing some work experience and this, that, and the other. So the great collaborations that can happen, and I love the Facebook support group for that. Sometimes it gets a bit chopsy, and you get everybody, as in any sector, people have lots of different methods and ways of working and things that they do, and not everything will work for everybody, and people get quite cross sometimes if people disagree with them. But it is a melting pot. It's a nice opportunity to go, what about? And the other thing I love about it, you only have to look around this group. How amazing that so many women, how many, opportunity, and that's just a personal, and I'm sorry, I can't see if there is any, Martin, sorry. But, it's lovely. It's a really nice kind of community, a really supportive community. And we want to try and diversify that as much as we possibly can. So lots of different styles, from graffiti to fine art to all you name it. I don't think there is a style yet that hasn't been kind of tackled. So hopefully new people will come on board. Mandy, sorry, did you want?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not currently local to Blackpool, but I grew up in the area. My family's all still there.
Excellent.
Lots of friends.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant.
I feel like, I kind of still am, even though I don't live there. I'm in the South Lakes now, so.
Oh, lovely.
Just up the road.
We'll be up there next. Yeah, did you have a question, lovely?
Yeah, I'm not an artist, but we have an idea, a group of ladies. We are local, we're from Fleetwood, and we do have a community group, and we do have an idea. Is that okay to put that forward?
Absolutely, and I mean, as long as you have the ability collectively to see that created, then absolutely. We've had all sorts of kind of knitter natter groups who've done, kind of all sorts of different designs. What I would say is that in the vast majority of cases, the sculptures are going to be on display externally. But that doesn't mean to say, and I just went on Wax Lyrical for ages about 3D features and additional things. If you have an idea that is so worth for us, is we can absolutely see the benefit of it. We had an amazing, in Cambridge, there was a group called Dinky Doors, and they do these tiny miniature doors in buildings, and they came to us with this concept, and it was like, why would we not do? I mean, we'd be mad not to. And there was additional cost involved, and there was additional time and all sorts of elements. but we found a sponsor and we sold this amazing idea to them, and they were like, absolutely, we want a real standout piece for the trail. So yeah, don't limit yourselves because I'm going, oh, don't do that. But you know, if you've got and community groups are a brilliant way of us being able to tap in to a wider community. So you know, that when I say diversity, that kind of ticks a lot of those kind of things in our heads of going, you know, these ideas have come from a collective group of people within that area. But the other thing I would say is, if you aren't successful in having that design or that concept selected, it might also be worth chatting to the learning team. So when we talk about the learning program, it is not just for schools. It can be scout groups, guide groups, old age groups. It can be all sorts of things. And there's a fee to be involved, or there's a cost, but it's a fundraising target. So it might be as a group of artists or a group of community members that your community group might actually decide to take on a smaller Elmer, and although they are smaller, they're actually really still quite significant size and shape. So that might be another way of being able to get that group of creatives involved if for any reason your design wasn't selected.
Thank you.
Lauren?
Hello. I think Rhiannon was before me, but I don't know. I didn't even know what button I hit. But hello, sorry, my accent sounds so strong. No, I was hello. I was just checking. Is there particular like you know the way in some trails there's like packs for like inspiration? Is there going to be one for the Blackpool one? You know, like one of the trails I was applying for, like was looking at like the history of the certain area or like certain things to keep in mind. Is that going to be?
I think it's just very open-ended. I don't think there's a specific theme, or it's very open. One of the things that I would always say in terms of top tips is, and some of my regular artists are going to kick me for saying this, but think about who have already been announced as sponsors. You know, if you're trying to appeal, getting shortlisted is quite tricky. You know, we're getting more and more submissions to each of the events and trails. So having your work stand out and be selected. So in terms of tips for around that, think about who's already sponsoring. Whilst we never want any design to have logos or to be in particular corporate colours, you can be quite smart around things that might appeal to certain people, and you'll never be able to predict what sponsors will be able to pick. But I always think fun, quirky, some kind of local significance. You know, obviously Blackpool has a whole load of things that it's not well known for. So things that are gonna pierce the psyche or get people excited, things that are, you know, maybe a spin on words or a link to different communities. Quite often there will be an Elmer or a sculpture that will represent a diverse community. We often have like an LGBTQ plus design. We will often have something that celebrates architecture or IT. A lot of our sponsors come from sectors that you will never have heard of. We get your Nando's and your John Lewis's and your Virgin, but we'll also have stuff that is so obscure. One of the ones in Southend is a company called IPECO, and they are global brand leaders for the creation of airline seats. Who knew? But they are one of the most engaged and amazing sponsors that any of our projects have ever had. So if there is on any of the if you look on the website, you'll be able to see in social media, keep an eye on who's being announced as a new sponsor, because that might trigger an idea and it might just get you a foot in the door. The other things, you know, like geography, a lot of people will pick something because it is representative. So we don't want a million that all look like, you know, street views or skylines, but kind of think about those themes that have that significance. And what other kind of tips do do we have for, oh, and when you're submitting your designs, when in order to get, they get shortlisted and they get sent on to the next stage, a designer will have to strip out everything other than the design template to put it on a plaque or to put it on a flip book for the sponsors to design. If you annotate all over your document, it makes it a lot more difficult. And I'm not saying that designs are not selected for that reason, but anything, when you're submitting your design, things that are crisp, things that, you know, a lot of artists are now doing their design work in Procreate or in Photoshop or in design packages. Now, not everybody works like that. And I would say the designs that are hand painted or hand drawn and submitted are given as equal a chance as any that are digitally rendered. But sometimes things that don't always get through are if somebody has used like a photo montage to show their concept, but there is a concern that maybe the artist isn't going to be able to replicate that photo quality on the, you know, so think about how, if the viewer who might come to that event, they might be a sponsor that works every day in a finance company, they've got a really boring life, they don't know anything about art, they're just literally coming and what's in front of them, they might not even read the design information context. A lot of people make the decision based on that visual impact. So I always think when you're submitting, imagine that you pull every bit of context away from it. What does that design say to you? Does it make sense to everybody? Does it make you smile? Because as Charlie, our CEO, always says, we are in the business of smiles. And if your design is joyous, bright, colourful, and brings a smile to people's faces, that's what's going to, you know, help you be remembered. Sorry, I could talk for hours, and I know that we need to finish up soon. Rhiannon, did you have a question?
Hi, yeah, so it's linked to the possible ideas, because you mentioned certain things could be copyrighted. Would a tourist attraction be under that category?
No, it depends. I mean, I think obviously a lot of our sculptures have iconic buildings and things like that. I think if it's stylized and it's in your design, I don't see that would be an issue. If you had a big Blackpool Tower on it, or, you know, the illuminated lights, though, it's impossible to kind of copyright those things. But, you know, if you were using the I don't know, the outline of Blackpool Tower that's on the, you know, the tourist information guide, then that will be somebody's illustration. So just be kind of mindful of that. It's more, I guess, that just to give you a bit of context, the celebrity ones that have been problematic in the past have been things like, we had a Freddie Mercury gorilla, and it was wearing the Live 8 jacket from the famous concert, and it was a very cartoony image of Freddie Mercury, big teeth, on a gorilla. Now, Brian May found it incredibly defamatory because he said Freddie was always had a massive problem with the way that his image was used, and the fact that it was on a monkey or a gorilla could have been seen as having underlying racial connotations. Now, I know the artist who painted that, the biggest Freddie Mercury Queen fan in the world, and would never have done anything to be defamatory, but it's how these things are consumed and how things are twisted and whatever. So we ended up, they were very contentious. It had to be removed from the street immediately, but through some kind of gentle communication with the different parties, we got agreement to put it back on the trail, but to just paint the face as a gorilla, just as a standard beautiful silverback gorilla wearing the yellow jacket, and that was absolutely fine. It was really, really popular. But I just kind of be quite thoughtful if you are planning to use somebody's kind of celebrity status, then think about the way in which it is construed. Could somebody take offense, I guess, is the thing to avoid or to steer clear of. We've had some we've had some great ones that, and normally they are a bit tongue-in-cheek. You know, we had some gratitude sculptures when we were doing the NHS event, touring event, that had some kind of celebrity stylized, you know, comic strip kind of characters on. And they were, you know, we didn't have any concerns or any issues around that. So yeah, no, most of the time it's okay, but it's always worth just flagging.
Great, thank you.
Sarah, excuse me.
Hello, thank you for the lovely presentation. Can I be really greedy and have 2 questions if I ask them quickly?
You can have them as many as you want. I'd stay here forever.
Thank you. First one for the hospice team. Is there anything in particular you're looking for in the designs that you would love to be commissioned for the trail, like in terms of subject matter, themes, colours?
We've had this discussion today.
Already.
Yeah, I think just like Annie said, we're just looking for the broadest possible, most joyful, most colourful possible kind of, not that they have to be colourful, you know, we're just looking for a really broad array of different styles, like mediums, all the, like, you know, spray paint, illustration, just everything, because we just want it to be massive, bright, bold, eye-catching, and just really represent kind of the diversity, not only of Brian House and the families we look after, but also, like, we're in Blackpool, that is a really diverse community, and we just really want to kind of, you know, represent that and give something back to the community that everyone's going to enjoy, and everyone is going to see a sculpture and go, oh, wow, I love that one. So kind of, yeah, just everything and anything is up for grabs.
Thank you, that's a brilliant answer. My second question's for you, Annie, and in terms of, you're talking about designs being really crisp in digital format to try and get on the shortlist, bit of a wildcard question. Are any of the sculptures, for example, Elmer, available as a 3D model so you could design them that way?
Yeah, absolutely. We've probably the only ones that we have figurines for is Elmer and the Snow Dog. So we do have some wee ones about this big that it could, I mean, one of the things that we used to do a project every year in Lincoln, or every couple of years in Lincoln, and they always used to create a miniature version. Obviously it's a lot of extra work, and to be fair, I guess the reason why we probably wouldn't necessarily encourage that is it would give you, you know, I don't think it would be necessarily fair to everybody else if some people had a 3D and some people didn't. So, and quite often when those designs are being put on display, they will be on walls or they'll be in a flip book. So it might get a bit of excitement amongst the panel, but it wouldn't necessarily get you any further down the track in terms of selection with sponsors, because when we come to display it, we wouldn't really have a way of doing it. But it's a nice idea. I love the idea, and believe me, we've got all sorts of bits in the past that have come through with design submissions, but those are only ever seen by the selection panel, not by the sponsors, because there just isn't the mechanism to kind of do that. But yeah, I like where you're coming from.
That's really interesting. I think maybe I didn't ask my question properly, because you're talking about the physical ones you can hold.
Yeah,
I was talking about digital file that you could, example, paint in like Blender, ZBrush, like gaming software.
It has been done. We've got an artist in Manchester who when he submits, he does a lot of he does a lot of the scanning of when we're actually creating the physical molds and things. So he's been known to do it in a 3D kind of way. But again, it would be difficult for us to share that, because I don't think a lot of the people who would sit on the panels would necessarily have that. But it would definitely, you know, I mean, in terms of for the team locally, and getting through to that selection, it might be a possibility. It's just, yeah, it's more about kind of the management and the administration from our side of things to make it fair and equitable. So I guess that's why we provide the template. When we were doing World Reimagined, they decided that they weren't going to have a template because it was a globe, and they said, you know, do your design on a flat, or you can do it in a sphere if you want, but obviously it's a globe and it's very difficult to show that. And it caused more confusion than any other project because there wasn't just a standardized template. So they came in every different variation, and that made it very difficult to then share those amongst the people who needed to make a decision. So I would say sticking to the template is probably, it's not always the easiest thing, because we're always very aware of the fact that we're asking you to design something on a flat piece of paper that is going to pop out into a 3D thing. So but yeah, and some of the packs have more you know, sides. You know, I always try and ask our event partners to consider no more than 2 sides, and sometimes a face, because sometimes you need the face to be able to kind of really show the design. But yeah, sorry, we're not that sophisticated just yet, but maybe in the future, Jetson style, we'll have like you can get in and you can physically walk around the sculpture. I'll put that suggestion along with my keep asking Charlie for a helicopter. But,
brilliant. Well, has anyone got any more? How long is the time period to paint the Elmer? So our painting period will begin in December and end in February. So it's 3 months to paint the sculpture.
And in terms of your question about the delivery and transporting of the sculpture, I think you said you're in Manchester. I think you did the Coos, didn't you? I don't know where you are. I'm just sorry, we did a Windows of Creativity thing, and I'm pretty sure that that's who you are. Yeah, so in terms of delivery, it may be possible, and sometimes in some instances, although Nick always tells me off for offering this, if getting to Whaley Bridge, which is where we're based, is easier, it might be that we might be able to hold some of your sculptures back there and have artists painting from our warehouse if that's closer. But in most instances, there are a couple of courier companies that I can certainly pass on details, and Elmer is a lot easier to move than some of our giant Indian elephants or dinosaurs when we were doing the trail in Norwich. But in most instances, it's in the contract that the artists have responsibility for getting the sculptures to and from. So just make sure, you know, don't rely on a pallet network, because if you put stuff in a pallet network, it gets damaged. It may touch 20 different pairs of hands and things can get scratched and scraped. You know, kind of once everybody has been commissioned, we'll have an idea of where everybody is geographically. And so we can start to come up with a plan and kind of look at whether there's cost saving mechanisms or kind of sharing loads or people moving from one end of the country. If Wild and Art are doing some deliveries, then it might be a bit that we can tag it onto that. So there is the responsibility for the cost normally comes out of the out of your fee, and that can be taken out kind of at the point where you invoice. So if the team are coordinating it, they may try and cap it, or they may try and support it. But it's just one of those considerations to have.
Perfect. Well, has anyone got any other questions that they wanted to ask now? I'm conscious you've all been online and very concentrating very diligently for a long time now, so we don't want to keep you too long, but if anyone's got any more questions that they really want to ask now, do feel free, or otherwise you've got our contact details. You're more than welcome at any time to call Joe or I, or drop us an email,
Absolutely.
And if there's anything we can help you with, then do feel free. So if anyone wants to ask any final questions, feel free. Or otherwise, we'll
can't wait to see what people put in. That's the exciting bit for us.
We are very excited.
Yeah. And we're very excited to all come and have a lovely time in Blackpool.
Well, that you will do.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, good luck, everybody, and enjoy.
Thanks,
Great, and
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.